Muhammad Zaid. Isa Shiraz.
That's my middle name.
What's your full name?
Isa Shiraz Malhi.
Oh yes. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Last week we spoke about the migration of the Muslims to, where did they go? Yes. Abyssinia, exactly. They went to Abyssinia. And we also spoke that the second time that they went, their numbers were much more like they were 80. And we also spoke about the incident with the king of Abyssinia. What was his name? Najashi, exactly. Do you remember his exact name? Ashuma. Okay, so that's what we spoke about. And then we also mentioned that Najashi was a secret Muslim. And the Prophet ﷺ, he did janazah over Najashi in Medina because no one performed janazah over Najashi in Abyssinia. So the Prophet ﷺ, he performed the janazah. And this is called Salatul Ghaib. So now we come to what was happening in Makkah. So so what happened is that there was two major conversions to Islam, two major conversions after the bulk of the Muslims, after they went to Abyssinia. Some scholars, they said that there were only around 37 to 38 Muslim men left in Makkah at the time. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He blessed the Muslims with two conversions. The first one was Hamza, son of Abdul Muttalib, the uncle of the Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And the second one was Umar ibn al-Khattab. And these two conversions, they proved to be a massive boost to the Muslims, and it gave them a lot of security and safety after having have suffered a lot of persecution. So the first of them to convert was Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. As we said, he was the uncle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's narrated that Hamza radiallahu anhu, he was a well-known archer. He was very good in archery and in hunting. And he used to go on long expeditions. He used to leave Mecca and go away to do hunting. And when he'd come back, before he'd go home, he would go to the Kaaba and he would do tawaf. Because even though he wasn't Muslim, because the mushrikun at that time, they still did tawaf around the Kaaba because they had remnants of the religion and the Sharia of Ibrahim alayhi salam that had been passed down. Although everything had become completely diluted with shirk, they still had some remnants. So he did tawaf and then he would go home. One day, Abu Jahl, he began to curse the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and insult him like he had never done before. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he heard him, but he didn't say a single thing back to Abu Jahl. And Abu Jahl went on and on cursing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and also cursing the forefathers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One woman who was listening, she got extremely offended and she thought, who is this man who has got the nerve and the audacity to curse someone from our tribe and our forefathers? So this wasn't because she loved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but this was all about tribal honor. So when Hamza radiallahu anhu, one day when he came back from one of his expeditions, the women, they went to Hamza and they said, what kind of an uncle are you? What kind of a leader are you? Your nephew is getting insulted left, right, center, and no one is there to defend your nephew. And he said, was this happening in public? Was everyone listening? And she said, yes, the whole of Mecca was listening to your nephew getting insulted. So Hamza radiallahu anhu, he became very, very enraged and very, very angry. So there and then he marched straight to the Kaaba and he found Abu Jahl sitting there. And he pulled out his bow, because he still had his bow and arrow with him. He pulled out his bow and he whacked Abu Jahl in the face. And a lot of blood started coming out of Abu Jahl. And what did Hamza radiallahu anhu he said? He said to him, how dare you curse my nephew? How dare you curse my nephew? And Hamza radiallahu anhu was so enraged And he didn't even mean to say this from the heart, but what he said next was it was a turning point. And what he said is, I too am a follower of his religion. Meaning, I too follow Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And this shocked him and it shocked the others around him because he didn't actually mean to say it. The reason he said it was like, and what are you going to do about it? I'm also a follower of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. When this happened, some of the tribesmen of Abu Jahl, they stood up to attack Hamza radiallahu anhu because he attacked Abu Jahl, who was the chief of Banu Makhzum. So then what happened is Abu Jahl said, it's okay, leave Hamza radiallahu anhu alone because I cursed him today like I cursed him on no other day before. So he understood the anger of Hamza. Hamza radiallahu anhu, he then, after this incident, he went home. He went back home, but he was very, very confused. Why was he confused? Because he had said something which he didn't mean, something which he couldn't no longer take back. And he made a dua to Allah and he said, Oh Allah, you know that I am of the leaders of the Quraysh and I have said something that I cannot take back. So if this matter is true, then guide my heart to it. And if it's not true, meaning if Islam is not true, then if it's not true, then cause me to die right now. So he spent most of the night just tossing and turning in his bed, worried and anguished and not knowing in his confusion about what to do because he had said something which he didn't mean. So the next day he went to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam and he explained everything that happened the day before. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he stood up and he started giving da'wah to Hamza radiallahu anhu and inviting him to Islam until Hamza radiallahu anhu finally he said, I testify that you are truthful and now I do not ever want to return to the paganism of my forefathers. So this was the conversion of Hamza radiallahu anhu. Initially he wasn't sincere when he said it. He didn't mean what he said when he said, I too am a follower of his religion. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he guided his heart and later in the battle of Uhud, he became known as Sayyid al-Shuhada, the leaders of the martyrs because he was martyred in the battle of Uhud. And when Hamza radiallahu anhu, when he accepted Islam, remember he was one of the strongest men in Mecca. When he accepted Islam, this was a massive boost to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam and the Muslims because he was the senior most Qurayshi that had accepted Islam. He was the son of the notorious and the famous Abdul Muttalib. He was the brother of Abu Talib, who was a chieftain of Banu Hashim. And so when Hamza radiallahu anhu converted, the mushrikun, they had to tone down their insults and their persecution and their hatred towards Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So Hamza radiallahu anhu coming to Islam was a massive blessing for the Muslims at the time. But this wasn't the only blessing because it's reported that only 3 days later we have the conversion of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Again, one of the most powerful and strongest men in Mecca. So Umar ibn al-Khattab, there's a story where he was, one day, remember we said that the Muslims went to Abyssinia. So one day when the Muslims were packing, he was walking past Layla. And Layla was one of the Sahabiyat that migrated to Abyssinia. And he saw her packing and he said, where are you going? And Layla said, how dare you ask us? You have the audacity to ask us where we're going. We're leaving because of you, Umar, because of your hatred and animosity towards us. Umar radiallahu anhu, he was a bit taken back and he said, has the matter reached this level? Meaning, has it become this serious that you now have to leave? And then he said, and he made a dua, and this shows that he had a soft side. He said, Allah ma'ak, may Allah be with you, may Allah protect you. And he went away. And then when the husband of Layla came home, she told him the story of what happened. And the husband of Layla, what did he say? He said that the donkeys of Umar's father will embrace Islam before Umar does. Meaning there's no chance that Umar will ever become a Muslim. These donkeys will become Muslim before Umar does. But the husband of Layla did not know that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had made a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what was that dua that he had made? He said, "O Allah, bring glory to Islam through one of these two men, whoever is more beloved to you, either Abu Jahl or Umar ibn al-Khattab. And the son of Umar, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he said that Umar was the one who was more beloved than Abu Jahl. So how did Umar radiallahu anhu, how exactly this great man and this strong man who was initially against the Muslims, how did he accept Islam? What is his conversion story? There's a few different stories, but in one narration, what happened is, one night, Umar radiallahu anhu, he went out. Remember, this is when he wasn't a Muslim, and he went out for a late night drink with his friends. So he went out wanting to drink with his friends. Wa alaikum assalam. So he went out looking for his friends and looking for some drink, but he could not find either of the two. So what did he decide to do instead? He said, okay, what I'll do is I'll just go to the Haram, where the Kaaba is. So he made his way to the Kaaba in the midst of the night, and there he found Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam in front of the Kaaba worshipping Allah Azza wa Jal. So Umar thought to himself, aha, now is my chance, I'm going to beat this man up. Because no one was there to witness it. So then he creeped up behind the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to attack him in the Haram, and he heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam reciting the Quran. And the surah which he was reciting was Surah Al-Haqqah. Surah Al-Haqqah. And he was completely immersed in the recitation, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he didn't even know that Umar radiallahu anhu was behind him. So Umar radiallahu anhu, when he heard the recitation, he was marveled at the recitation. He was amazed at the recitation. And as he was listening to it, he said to himself, this must be the beautiful statement of some sha'ir. It must be the statement of some poet. At that time, straight away, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was reciting, and incidentally, by the will of Allah, the next verse that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam recited was, وَمَا بِقَوْلِ شَاعِرٍ قَلِيلًا مَا تُؤْمِنُونَ. And it's not the word of a sha'ir, a poet. Little is what you believe. So Umar radiallahu anhu, he heard that. And so he thought, this must be the saying of a fortune teller, a kahin. The next verse which came was, which one was it, Ya Musa? وَلَا بِقَوْلِ كَاهٍ. Excellent. This is not the statement of a fortune teller. قَلِيلًا مَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. Little is what you remember. And then Umar radiallahu anhu, he said, then what is it then? And then the next verse was, anyone know? وَلَا بِقَوْلِ كَاهٍ قَلِيلًا مَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. Excellent. تنزيل من رب العالمين. So when Umar thought, then if it's not the statement of a sha'ir, of a poet, nor of a kahin, a soothsayer, then what is it? Allah said in the next verse, it's a revelation from the Lord of the worlds. And then Umar radiallahu anhu, he said to himself, what if he is inventing it? What if he's making it up? And the next verse was, anyone know? Excellent. Barakallahu feek. Well done. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he says, وَلَوْ تَقَوَّلَ عَلَيْنَا بَعْضَ الْأَقَاوِيلِ. And if Muhammad had made up about us some false sayings, لَأَخَذْنَا مِنْهُ بِالْيَمِينِ. We would have seized him by the right hand. ثُمَّ لَقَطَعْنَا مِنْهُ الْوَتِينَ. Then we would have cut him off from the aorta, which is the main blood vessel in the body, meaning he would have been finished. Umar radiallahu anhu then listened to the rest of Surah Al-Haqqah, and Umar radiallahu anhu, he narrates and he tells us himself, he said, this was the first time Islam entered my heart. And then Umar radiallahu anhu, he quietly left without hurting or harming Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So this was the first incident which moved Umar radiallahu anhu. Then one day the people of Quraysh, they were sitting, and Umar radiallahu anhu was amongst them, and Abu Jahl, once again he started criticizing Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Abu Jahl then started his tirade again, and he said, this man has done more to insult our fathers and our gods than anyone else. He's cursed our religion. He has said that anybody who worships idols will be punished in hell, which means that he is damning our forefathers to hell, meaning he's offended that Rasulullah is saying that whoever worships idols from their forefathers will go to hell. Who will finally rid us of this man? Who's going to get rid of him? And then he gave a reward. And he said, by Allah, whoever is successful in getting rid of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he promised them 100 of the best camels and 100 uqiyah, which is 100 pouches of silver. I will give it to him. And this was a massive amount of wealth which he, Abu Jahl, promised to whoever gets rid of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So Umar radiallahu anhu was there in the gathering, and he became greedy, and he took up the offer. So there and then he got up and he took out his sword, he uncovered his sword, and he walked with his unsheathed sword, marching towards Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam to kill him. On the way, he met a man, and he met a man named Nu'aym bin Abdullah. Nu'aym bin Abdullah, he was a recent convert to Islam, but he was a secret Muslim. So he saw Umar and he said, "Where are you going? What's happened?" Because he saw him walking with his sword uncovered. So Umar said, "Enough is enough. We have been cursed for too long. Our ancestors have been ridiculed. I'm now going to kill this man." And Nu'aym, he panicked because he didn't want Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam to be harmed. So he said to Umar, "Oh Umar, have you lost your mind? The Banu Abd Manaf, which is the tribe of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, or do you really think that they will allow you to live after this, after you kill one of their own? And if you really want to do something, then go back and fix your own family." Umar was shocked. He didn't understand. What do you mean, go back and fix my own family? So he said, "What do you mean?" And Nu'aym said, "Haven't you heard? Your own sister and your brother-in-law have accepted Islam." Nu'aym wanted to divert Umar away from Rasulullah to go somewhere else. So this enraged Umar. How could my own sister and my brother-in-law accept Islam? And so then he diverted, he changed his path, and he marched towards the house of his sister. So he gets to the house of his sister, and he can hear from behind the door some recitation of the Quran. And if there was no other inside in the house, there were three people. One is Khabbab. We mentioned the story of Khabbab. Who was Khabbab?
Was the person who made like the metal object.
Oh, amazing. MashaAllah, barakallahu feek. I wish I had another one to give you. But that was really good. Yeah, he was. So he was the ironmonger, and he was burnt on the back with steel. And his master was, if you remember, Ummi Anmar. He had a woman who was his master. So Khabbab was in the house, and he was teaching Fatima, who was the sister of Umar radiallahu anhu, and her husband Sa'id bin Zayd. So as soon as they heard Umar radiallahu anhu come to the door, Khabbab, he got up and he hid in a hiding place. And Fatima, she got the Quran and she hid it under her garment. And Umar radiallahu anhu, he then came in and he demanded to know what he had heard. He had heard the Quran. So Fatima, she denied it. She denied that he had heard anything. And he said, "I know what I heard. And I also know that both of you have accepted Islam." And Fatima and Sa'id, they continued to deny it. And this enraged Umar even more. What did he do? He leant forward to punch Sa'id, his brother-in-law. And as soon as he leant forward to punch Sa'id, Fatima came in the way to defend her husband. And he punched his sister, and her lips started gushing with blood, started bleeding a lot. And this then made Fatima and Sa'id angry, and then they admitted, and in their rage, and they said, "Yes, we have accepted Islam and we believe in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam." And when Umar saw their courageousness and he saw the blood coming from his sister, it softened his heart. And he calmed down, and then he asked her, "What was it that you were reading?" And Fatima, she didn't want to give him the Quran because he was a mushrik at the time. So he assured her that he would not desecrate the Quran and he wouldn't do anything to the Quran apart from recite it and read it. And then she told him that because since you're a mushrik, you are not allowed to touch the Quran, so go until you purify yourself. So he went and made ghusl, and he came back, and he started reciting and reading. He was one of the few Muslims in Mecca, or a few people in Mecca that could read and write. So he started reciting the Quran, and the Quran that they were reciting at the time was Surah Taha. Then he said, when he was calmed down, he said that, "Take me to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam." So Sa'id bin Zayd, the husband, he took him to Darul Arqam. Darul Arqam is a house which belonged to somebody called Al-Arqam. That was the secret meeting place for the Muslims. So he took him to Darul Arqam, and Umar radiallahu anhu still had the sword in his hand. So they turn up to Darul Arqam, and this is where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was, and the rest of the companions. And he knocks on the door. And one of the Sahabi, they saw him and they saw that he had his sword uncovered. And they said, Ya Rasulullah, Umar is outside with a sword in his hand. To which Hamza radiallahu anhu, the uncle, he said, let him in. For if Allah wants good, He will accept Islam. But if Allah wants other than this, then the very sword that he is holding will be the end of him. Meaning that I will use his own sword to kill him. And some of the Sahaba, then they opened the door and they escorted Umar radiallahu anhu to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And he came to Rasulullah, and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he held him by the collar and he said, Yabn al-Khattab, O son of Khattab. He said, what are you doing here? By Allah, if you continue in this path, Allah will destroy you with a punishment. And this is when Umar, he said, I have come to accept Islam, believe in Allah, believe in you, and testify to the truth. Upon hearing this, the Prophet ﷺ said, Allahu Akbar. And he said it so loud that everyone in Darul Arqam, they knew that Umar radiallahu anhu had embraced Islam. And at this point, the Muslims, there and then, about 40 of them, they marched in confidence and in security to the Kaaba to pray for the first time in public. And they went in 2 rows. One row was led by Hamza, and the other row was led by Umar radiallahu anhu. And this is when the title was given to Umar radiallahu anhu of Al-Faruq. Al-Faruq means the one that distinguishes between falsehood and between the truth. Abbas, Ibn Abbas, the cousin of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he once asked Umar, how did you acquire the title Al-Faruq? And Umar radiallahu anhu said, the Prophet gave me this title when I converted, and we marched to the Kaaba and prayed in public for the first time. And the Prophet ﷺ said, you are Umar al-Faruq. So he was Umar al-Faruq, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. So his conversion at this point, this was an amazing time for the Muslims. And Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, he said, when Umar was on his deathbed, he said, we have ever remained in glory since the days of Umar accepted Islam. So ever since he accepted Islam, Ibn Mas'ud said, we've remained in glory. And there's other stories as well regarding Umar radiallahu anhu's conversion to Islam. And one of them is that Umar radiallahu anhu, remember the person who challenged him and was going to give him a reward for killing Rasulullah? That was who? Abu Jahl, yes. Abu Jahl. So Umar radiallahu anhu wanted to personally inform Abu Jahl that he had become a Muslim. So he went to Abu Jahl's house and he knocked on the door. Abu Jahl opened the door and said, welcome. He said, welcome. What has brought you here? Umar said, I have personally come to inform you that I now believe in Allah and His Messenger, and I am now upon the religion of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Jahl slammed the door in his face and he said, may Allah curse you and what you've come with. So he found out that Umar radiallahu anhu had become a Muslim. Then Umar radiallahu anhu, he wanted the whole city to know that he had become a Muslim. He was a strong man. He was confident. He wasn't going to be shy of his faith. So he said, who is the one that can't keep a secret? Who is the most notorious gossiper in the whole of Mecca? And somebody said it's someone called Jamil bin Ma'mar. So Umar radiallahu anhu, he went to Jamil and he said that, do you know that I've got a secret? And he said, I've just accepted Islam and I'm now following the religion of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Jamil, he jumped up. He barely had gathered his clothes he was still naked. And he barely gathered his clothes to cover himself. And he marched out into the street and he started to shout at the top of his voice, O people of Makkah, O Quraysh, Umar ibn al-Khattab qad saba'a. That's what they would say when someone changed their religion and became a Muslim. And Umar radiallahu anhu, he corrected him and he said, no, aslamtu, I have become a Muslim rather than a Sabian. And it was also narrated that on that day, many people, they went to fight with Umar radiallahu anhu because he had converted, until he was offered protection by the father of Amr ibn al-As. We mentioned Amr ibn al-As last week. What was his significance? Anyone remember? The 2 men that were sent by the Quraysh to try to bring back the Muslims from Abyssinia. He was Amr ibn al-As. So his father was Al-As bin Wa'il. And Al-As bin Wa'il, he offered protection to Umar radiallahu anhu. And the blessings of Umar radiallahu anhu are so many. There's so many to mention. One of them is a hadith where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in a Sahih narration in Bukhari, he said, there were people before you who were communicated with by the angels, even though they weren't prophets. If there's anybody in my ummah like this, then it is Umar. And it's enough of a blessing to see what happened during the Khilafah, or when Umar radiallahu anhu, when he ruled and when he was in charge of the Muslims, Islam, it quadrupled in size. As for Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he solidified Islam in the Arabian Peninsula. He solidified it. And then Umar radiallahu anhu came and it quadrupled in size. So when this happened, so you've seen now there's been the Muslims migrated to Abyssinia, and this was a huge disgrace and a humiliation for the Quraysh. Also, in addition to that, two major prominent Qurayshis, they converted to Islam. And so the Quraysh decided that something had to be done. Someone had to kill Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So all of the tribes of Quraysh, they got together and they decided that we're going to get somebody from the outside, a third party, to kill Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and we're going to pay whatever blood money needs to be paid. Blood money is what you give when somebody has been murdered, either by mistake or intentionally. You give amount of one tribe would give the other tribe money. So they said, whatever Banu Hashim want, Banu Abdul Muttalib, then we will give them whatever they want. So they went to Abu Talib, who was a chieftain of Banu Hashim, and they said that either you hand over Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, or we'll cut you off from the rest of the Quraysh. And Abu Talib obviously was furious, and he totally rejected that silly proposal. So the other tribes, what did they do? They started to boycott the Banu Hashim. And how did they boycott them? The way they boycotted them, they said that nobody was allowed to do business with them anymore. The shops weren't allowed to sell anything to them. The singletons were not allowed to now marry into Banu Hashim. No, there were no social gatherings with Banu Hashim. These were all completely banned. And Banu Hashim were also denied food and water. And this was a pact that they wrote, a pact or a treaty or an agreement. And they got that agreement and they wrote it, and they left that agreement, they put it into a parchment, and they left it in the Kaaba. And then Abu Talib, he then decided voluntarily, he said, we'll leave Makkah. So he left Makkah and they went to a nearby valley and they lived there in very harsh conditions actually. They never had much food there. And some of the other other non-Muslims from Quraysh in Makkah, they used to send their food, some food and water to Banu Hashim, because they felt sorry for them and because they had some kind of a soft spot for them. And so the complete boycott of Banu Hashim and Banu Abdul Muttalib, this lasted between 1.5, there's varying reports, but it's been between 1.5 to 3 years. 1.5 to 3 years, Banu Hashim, in the name of tribal honor, they spent outside of Mecca in a valley in very, very harsh conditions. Until finally, this boycott ended. How did it end? There's a number of reasons. Firstly, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he made dua against the kuffar of Mecca. And he said, "Oh Allah, send upon them a drought and a famine like the famine of Yusuf." And Allah accepted this dua, and the mushrikun in Mecca, they went through a very severe famine and a drought, so much so that they were forced to start eating dead animals and the skin of dead animals. And they knew that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam had made a dua, and they sent someone as a representative, like a messenger, to go and bring about some reconciliation. This was the first thing. The second thing was that the others from the non-Muslims in Quraysh, who really felt guilty about what was happening to their relatives in a nearby valley, who were starving, didn't have much food, didn't have much water, the likes of Zuhair bin Abi Umayma and Hisham bin Amr, they decided that something had to be done. So they devised a plot. And that plot was, when all of the Quraysh, when they sit in their nadi is like their council meeting, Zuhair, he got up and Abu Jahl was there. And Zuhair, he got up and he said, for how long are we going to starve our own relatives to death? At this, Abu Jahl became furious and he said, who do you think you are? You know, we all agreed to this treaty and this pact. When he said this, Hisham, he stood up and he said, I didn't agree, it was all your idea. And Abu Jahl began to defend himself, and one of the seniors, Mut'im, he got up and he said, you forced this on us. So one by one, every single person, they started to go against Abu Jahl. And Abu Jahl, he figured out that something fishy was going on, that they had devised a plot, and this was all a plan. Obviously, the other Qurayshis, they never admitted it, but the public opinion was now changing against Abu Jahl. And the third thing that happened is Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he went to his uncle Abu Talib. Remember, they were living out in the valley. And he went to Abu Talib and he said, oh my uncle, Allah has informed me that the treaty, remember the treaty is still in the Kaaba, he said that the treaty they wrote has been eaten up by termites and ants, except for one phrase, Bismikallahum, in your name, O Allah. This is all that remains of that treaty. So when Abu Talib heard this, he believed the Prophet and he risked everything and he said, okay, fine. So he marched to Mecca straight away with some other non-Muslims, and they went to Mecca and he announced, oh my people, let's forget about everything and let's go and get the treaty out. Bring out the treaty and we'll see if we can reach a negotiation and a deal. And this made the rest of the Qurayshis happy because they thought that Abu Talib was now going to give up Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So they went and they took out the treaty from the Kaaba, and Abu Talib said, my nephew, he's already told me that everything in here has been eaten up apart from the phrase Bismikallahumma. So if this is if my challenge to you, and he challenged them, he said, if this is the case, then let us be and let us come back to Makkah as normal. If not, then I will give you my nephew to you. So he's relying on everything. He's relying on what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him about this treaty. So they went and they got the treaty and they opened it and they had a look and they realized that everything was eaten up apart from Bismikallahum, exactly what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had told them. And so they were forced, the Quraysh were then forced to accept the deal, and they allowed, and they got rid of the boycott, and they cancelled the boycott, and Banu Hashim and Banu Abdul Muttalib, they returned to Mecca. So, yes.
I might be wrong here, but I think the valley which the Muslims were staying in, I think it was called the Valley of Tahir.
Allah Alam, I don't know. What I did read is that they were staying in a valley called Talib. I think it was named after Abu Talib actually, but I'll look into that. Jazakallahu khairan. Okay, so when they came back, this was the 10th year of Da'wah. So this is around 2.5 years before the hijrah to Medina. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then He willed immediately after this that 3 great calamities would strike Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And because the 3 great calamities occurred, this year was called Aamul Huzn. Aamul Huzn means the year of sorrow, because this was a very, very sad year for Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So the first of the calamities was about 5 to 6 weeks after the Quraysh, after Banu Hashim and Banu Abdul Muttalib, after they returned to Mecca, about 5 to 6 weeks later, Abu Talib, the one who was protecting Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the beloved uncle, he passed away. And what happened is, when he was on his deathbed, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he came to Abu Talib and he said, Ya Am, O uncle, قل لا إله إلا الله, say la ilaha illallah, kalimatan ashhadu laka biha inda Allah. That will be a statement that I can then testify on your behalf with Allah. Every time he said that, there were 2 other men in the room. One was Abu Jahl and the other one was Abdullah bin Abi Umayyah ibn al-Mughira. Every time Rasulullah told him to say La ilaha illallah, they said, Ya Abu Talib, atarghabu an millati Abdul Muttalib. They said, Oh Abu Talib, are you going to turn away from the religion of Abdul Muttalib? So this kept on happening. He would say La ilaha illallah, and they would say, are you going to turn away from the religion of Abdul Muttalib? until finally Abu Talib decided that he would remain on the religion of Abdul Muttalib. And he refused to say, La ilaha illallah. And this upset Rasulullah. And what did he say? He said, Ama wallahi la astaghfiranna laka ma lam unha ank. Which means that, wallahi, I'm going to seek forgiveness for you until Allah stops me. And then Allah sent down the ayah, ما كان للنبي والذين آمنوا أن يستغفروا للمشركين ولو كانوا أولي قربى من بعد ما تبين لهم أنهم أصحاب الجحيم. Which means, it is not proper, it's not befitting for the Prophet and those who believe to ask Allah's forgiveness for the mushrikun, even if they're near relatives, even if they're of near relatives, after it has become clear to them that they are dwellers of the fire. So the Prophet ﷺ, he stopped seeking forgiveness for Abu Talib. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he also sent another verse in this regard. He said, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَهُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِالْمُهْتَدِينَ. إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي. You, O Muhammad, do not guide whom you love. You don't have that power to guide people just because you love them. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. Allah guides whomever He wills. وَهُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِالْمُهْتَدِينَ. And He knows best those who are guided. So this isn't actually when Abu Talib died during this incident. And actually Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he was not present when Abu Talib died. And this Ali radiallahu anhu, and Ali, remember, Ali is the son of Abu Talib. He came to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam to inform him about the death of Abu Talib. And he came to him and he said, your uncle has passed away. Or in another narration, he said, your misguided uncle has passed away. And this shows how upset Ali radiallahu anhu was that his father had died upon paganism. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said to Ali, he said, go and bury him. So Ali said, but he's a mushrik. He raised the question, he's not even a Muslim. Why should I go? Is it okay for me to go and bury him? And Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he responded, go and bury him and come back as soon as you are finished and do not do anything on the way. So Ali, he went and buried him, and then he came back whilst the dust was still on his body. And that's when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he made a long dua for Ali radiallahu anhu to give him some comfort, to give him some solace. And Ali radiallahu anhu, he said, I would never ever give up on all those du'as. I would never give up all those du'as for this world and all that is in it. Meaning he valued the du'a that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam made for him at that time. Many years later, Al-Abbas, who is the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he asked Rasulullah and he said, ما أغنيت عن عمك فإنه كان يحوطك ويغضب لك. He said, you didn't benefit your uncle Abu Talib. You never benefited him. He used to protect you and he used to get angry on your behalf. To which Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he responded and he said, هو في ضحضاح من نار. He, Abu Talib, will be in the shallow parts, the peripheries of the hellfire. وَلَوْلَا أَنَا لَكَانَ فِي الدَّرْكِ الْأَسْفَلِ مِنَ النَّارِ. If it wasn't for me and my intercession, Abu Talib would have been in the lowest depths of the hellfire. So Abu Talib, he will be punished because he died as a pagan and he didn't say La ilaha illallah and he wasn't a Muslim. But he will be given the least punishment. And what is the least punishment? He will be made to wear sandals and sandals of fire. يَغْلِي مِنْهُ دِمَاغُ, which means that his brain will boil from the heat. This will be, subhanAllah, may Allah protect us, the least amount of punishment that there will be. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He didn't will for Rasulullah, for Abu Talib to become a Muslim, whatever his wisdom, out of his infinite wisdom. So this was Abu Talib. As for his other uncles and aunties, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he had 10 uncles. So there were 11 brothers altogether. One of them was Abdullah, and then there were 10 left. And out of all the 11, 7 of them, they passed away before the Prophet ﷺ became a prophet. And 4 of them, they heard the message. 2 of them accepted Islam. One was, as we said, Hamza radiallahu an, and also Abbas radiallahu an. And the 2 that rejected were Abu Lahab and also Abu Talib. Abu Talib, his real name was Abd Manaf, and Manaf was an idol, so servant of Manaf. And Abu Lahab, his actual name was Abdul Uzza, and Uzza was also the name of an idol. So the two that rejected, they had this horrible name, servants of idols, and the two that accepted, incidentally, they had beautiful names, because Hamza and Abbas are both different names for the lion. As for his aunties, there were a total of 6 aunties. And we know for sure that one of them converted, and this was Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib. So she became a Muslim. There was another one that we know that she heard the message, and this was Atiqa, but we don't know if she converted. As for the other 4, we don't know what their story is and whether they even heard the message at all. So this was the first calamity, and that was the death of Abu Talib. The second calamity then strikes, and that is the death of his beloved wife, Khadija radiyallahu anha, in whom he found so much comfort and solace, and who supported him right from the beginning. And she said the beautiful words when he first received the revelation. She said, Kalla wallahi ma yukhzik Allah abada. Nay, Allah will never ever disgrace you. She really supported him. So this happened only about 40 days after the death of Abu Talib. And when Khadija radiallahu anha passed away, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he took charge of everything. He buried her himself. And a number of the Sahaba, they reported that after Khadija radiallahu anha passed away, they didn't see Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam smile for months on end. This is how hurt Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was. So Abu Talib passed away, and he gave him a lot of protection. And Khadija radiallahu anha, she passed away, and she gave him a lot of comfort. So these were the 2 most closest people that he had. So this year was extremely difficult. So when Abu Talib, remember we said Abu Talib passed away, and we also said that he was the chief of Banu Hashim. So when he passed away, somebody else had to become chief. Who do you think became chief? Abu? For Banu Hashim. No. So it was Abu Lahab. Abu Jahl was Banu Makhzum. So Banu Hashim, it was Abu Lahab. Abu Lahab then became the chief of Banu Hashim. And one day, surprisingly, he then showed a bit of a soft spot for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One day somebody was cursing Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this obviously was somebody from Banu Hashim. So Abu Lahab, he went to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said, "O Muhammad, be as you were in the time of Abu Talib," meaning the privileges that you had then carry on with them now. "For as long as I am alive," this is Abu Lahab saying this, he said, "for as long as I am alive, you shall live in the same manner." He didn't do this out of love for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He did this only because of tribal honor. This is tribal honor. So this is really, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam must have found some comfort in this, because Abu Talib was his protector. And after Abu Talib passed away, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was completely then exposed. So Abu Lahab offering protection is a major deal. So when this happened, the people, they thought that Abu Lahab had converted, and they started to spread a rumor that he accepted Islam. So they asked him, "Have you become a Sabian?" And he said, "No, I am just protecting my flock." So that's his intention, just to protect his own flock. And Abu Jahl and Utbah, they devised the plan. And what they said is, they went to Abu Lahab and they said, "Why don't you ask Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, why don't you ask your nephew about the fate of your father Abdul Muttalib? This Abdul Muttalib that you're so attached to, and you're defending Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the name of Abdul Muttalib, why don't you go and ask Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam about the fate of Abdul Muttalib?" So Abu Lahab, he went to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he asked him. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he knew that this was a trick question. So he said, "He is with his people." So Abu Lahab, he got happy and he thought, okay, that's fine, he's with his people. And he went to Abu Jahl and he told him what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had said. And Abu Jahl said, "You're a fool. What he means by he's with his people is that he's in the hellfire." So Abu Lahab, at this point, he realized what the meaning of is he's with their people, and he became enraged and he withdrew his protection from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now there was no one to protect Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Talib has gone. Abu Lahab has withdrew his protection. So at this point, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had no one in Mecca. So he then thought, let me try a different city, and that is the city of At-Ta'if. And inshallah we'll cover the story of what happens in At-Ta'if inshallah next week. وصلى اللهم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.